Well, boys, the bad news, the Wild fall to the Penguins on the same night that the Stars and the Avs take home 2 points. But hey, the Gophers are headed to the Natty. We dive into it all. Let's go. Gophers win. They're headed to the Natty. They beat Boston University 6-2. Honestly, it felt like it should have been 12-2. If they counted pipes, then it might have been 24-2. Oh my gosh, we absolutely outplayed them. Set to face Quinnipiac in the national championship. We'll talk about that later in the podcast, but we definitely have to kick it off with what everybody's thinking about, and that is from the Penguins game last night, Eriksson Ek. For anybody who missed the game, he blocked a shot to the lower body, and man, was he in pain. I mean, usually he's a tough guy. He's strong. He can take a hit, but he could not move. He was just a statue out there after he took that shot. He didn't actually fall to the ground, thankfully. He had to get some help off the ice, though, from one of his teammates or two. So that did not look good. What did you see, Eric? Do you know where it actually hit him? Like, did it hit him between the shin pad? Like, I couldn't really tell.
There's an old saying in hockey, it's best not to get hit in an area of your body where you don't have a pad, and unfortunately they haven't invented a shin pad that covers, full tibia and full ankle and full everything else. You've got the protection of your boot, Cole and Alex, but you don't have the protection, everywhere on the lower leg. And Evgeny Malkov shoots the puck as hard as anybody in the National Hockey League. And credit to Ecker that he blocked a shot, killing a penalty on what turned out to be the game-winning goal. But that puck hit him where there was not pads, obviously. And it's one or two things. It's a broken bone or it's a deep contusion in a muscle, and neither are very quick heals. However, you can obviously play through a contusion much quicker and than you can a broken bone. So the Wild and their fans are holding their collective breaths on this Good Friday morning, waiting for doctor reports and a full scan. I'm sure they did some scans out at Mellon Arena in Pittsburgh, but they're going to get in front of the TRIA gang this morning with some high-tech equipment, and Ek will learn his fate on whether he can move forward or whether he needs to either probably be done or join the club in progress as long as they continue to win in the playoffs. But, certainly it took all the people to get hit right now. Your number one center, a guy who's got variables on just about every application the Wild make. This is terrifically a bad Friday on a Christian holiday, Good Friday for Minnesota Wild fans.
Right, for sure.
Yeah, Wild fans are definitely nervous right now. We're right at the doorstep of playoffs, and losing one of our crucial pieces to our lineup is definitely concerning. So we'll all be holding our breath waiting for that to come out.
Yeah, one of the things we remembered last night is that with under 5 games left now, things happen very quickly in the standings. And obviously, whether Ek is temporarily gone or gone for the playoffs, or just going to be resting up hopefully a deep muscle contusion from that shot of Malkin's, that there's also factors now that are going to raise their heads pretty quickly on whether you can actually win the division or whether you want to start resting players. So with under 5 games left in the season and those 2 points being gained by Dallas and Colorado last night and not gained by Minnesota, we'll see I believe we'll see some roster moves here just to rest the players and, probably take a look at who could come up from Iowa to sit in for Ek. Sammy Steele is kind of the Band-Aid right now, the immediate Band-Aid, but there's talk that Marco Rossi could be, by the way, it's Marco Rossi, not Rossi. He's made it known that it's no longer Rossi, but in Austria they call it Rossi. And so you don't have to roll the R, but
it's so
long story short,
it took him so long to say that.
Yeah, no kidding. But long story short, Rossi could be activated here pretty quick from the baby Wild down in Des Moines.
Yeah, that'd be good to see too before playoffs, just to kind of see what he can do again, give him another shot up here. I would like to see it for sure. But Eriksson Ek, we all know he's tough. He's no LeBron James. He's not sitting out if he's barely injured. He's going to be out there if the doctors allow him to be out there. We saw him play last year in the playoffs with the broken teeth in the same period after it happened. I mean, that's just, he's a man. He's going to be out there if he can. So hope and pray that he's out there, because that would be a devastating loss for sure. going into playoffs if he is actually out for playoffs. That would not be ideal. That Boldy, Mojo, Ek line has just been outstanding. Even last night, they buried a goal. It was Matt Boldy's 100th career point. Let's jump ahead and talk about Matt Boldy for a second. I mean, that is impressive. In just 125 games, Boldy now has 100 points. And now we have the two fastest scorers to 100 points on our team right now in the history of the Wild, right? Kirill did it in 92 games, and now Boldy in 125. And yet behind them, Gabrick, Granlund, Koivu. Took Koivu 181. So it feels good to have two of the best scorers we've ever had in Wild history on the team together right now. And hopefully we see Kaprizov back soon. I don't know if you've had any updates or heard any news. I know we've seen him out skating at practice. I'm sure he's practicing again today, trying to be there tomorrow, hopefully. What do you think?
Yeah. The dovetail to the X, big question mark right now is there's help on the way. The cavalry is ready, and that cavalry looking a lot like Gustav Nyquist, the free agent pickup from Columbus, is ready to go from an upper body injury, and Kirill Kaprizov, from all I'm told, is begging anybody and everybody who will listen to him to get back on the ice. Dean Evison has gone public as to say that he will probably not bring them both back at the same time, but that was much prior to Eriksson Ek. And by the way, we failed to mention Oscar Sundqvist got nailed last night on a couple of cross checks and now has an undisclosed injury of his own. So they're -2 in the forward department. Nyquist and Kaprizov would make them even again with their +2 coming back from injury here. And then we've talked about Rossi, but we talked the other podcast the other day on Hot Dish about a return of Kirill being imminent, but we also talked about having a governor because the Wild were in fairly good shape here and also, winning more than they're losing. But this injury bug could change a lot of the paradigm of the thinking there. And again, what we just talked about, Alex and Cole, is if it does become out of reach here and there's 3 games left, then it might just be a more vanilla offense that the Wild want to field until they can get, back to, square one in the playoffs with their, A++ lineup.
Yeah, all fans are just on the edge of their seat waiting for Kaprizov to come back. I mean, yes, the team has played great, but, what's it going to look like once Kaprizov gets back in here? Is the momentum going to continue? Is it just going to gel together? So I think that's definitely going to be an interesting thing to watch in these next couple games.
Well, another thing is you take a look at the residuals. I've noted the other day that I think Max Zuccarello has maybe 2 or 3 goals and less than a handful of assists in the 13 games that number 97 was out of the lineup. So obviously there are ripple effects when a player of Kaprizov's status gets scratched from the lineup due to injury, and Max Zuccarello is one of them, and he's admitted he's in a little bit of a funk right now. So Kaprizov back, that charges Zuccarello. Now we start wondering about if Ek is out, what that ripple effect looks like for a guy like Matt Boldy, who we just got done talking about, fastest to 100, joining some elite company. But, this is the juggling act that we're seeing now, and it was a juggling act before the injuries, and it continues to be a juggling act and a read and react. The silver lining in it all is the Wild are going to the postseason. We've been kind of somber on this Good Friday, but they're in the playoffs, and the lineups that they field and the personnel that's available to them, hang on to your seat.
Right, for sure. And, obviously, like you said, it's kind of somber, but looking at the Penguins game, that's obviously why we're kind of down on ourselves right now, plus injuries. What were some of the positives that you seen stood out? Actually, before we get into the positives, let me bring up one more negative. Did you see the hit that Matt Dumba, he only got a 2-minute minor for it. They called it elbowing or interference or something. It was a late hit, and I've heard that there's potential that he could get suspended because it was maybe head contact.
Yeah, I think Russo had a note on that in that he's not really been suspended yet this year. He's been fined $5,000 for another suspect hit. There's a couple ways to look at it. I mean, I always told my kid when he went to college hockey don't admire his passes as a defenseman, because if you're admiring that beautiful pass that you make on an outlet play, you could get hit, and that's exactly what that kid from Pittsburgh did last night. And I think that's going to bode well, because he did not brace himself, and he was admiring an outlet pass, and Dumba finished a check.
Yep.
Whether he finished it or not, legally or illegally, I'm sure the kangaroo court at the National Hockey League will decide. But I don't think that, especially you start suspending players at playoff time, and then you're kind of tinkering with the fate of the outcome, and tampering with elections. Not to make a bad joke here, but
you're right. I think there'd just be way too much controversy around it if they actually suspended him. Because if you take a look at the hit, he went shoulder to shoulder, the guy's head, like you said, bobbed forward. But that was mostly because of the fact that he wasn't prepared, and that's why we don't see a lot of checking from behind in the NHL, because these guys are pros. They need to know how to take a hit, how to be ready for a hit, when it's coming. It wasn't that late. Like you said, he was admiring a pass. So I don't know. I can't imagine that they're going to suspend him. I hope they don't. But if they do, I don't know. We'll see what happens. But let's take a look. My gut tells me
it wasn't egregious. Before we could do that, and let's get all the negative out of the way. I think the biggest negative to me last night watching was, we had heard for 2 days how desperate the Penguins were. They've been throwing the kitchen sink at every team in the first period. They've been just coming out like they were shot out of a cannon. And they did just that against Minnesota, and Minnesota had no response. I think as you look towards the playoffs, you start looking at habits, tendencies, and trends. Well, your playoff opponent's going to come out shot out of a cannon. The Wild knew it. They anticipated it, and they had no answer for it. And I thought, and you can talk to some people now within the organization, that most disappointing facet of last night's game, at least from a hockey aspects, and, throwing out the injury front news. But very disappointing, I thought, that the Wild played the first 20 so uninspired and so seemingly unaffected by, a team desperate for the playoffs coming out, and Minnesota had no answer. That's the biggest negative, the biggest hockey negative I took away from last night's game. Alex?
Yeah, I'd probably say the same thing. It just felt, watching that first period, we just felt so dead. The Penguins were just so on top of it, and like you said, shot out of a cannon. Like, they were just on every puck and fighting hard, and just didn't feel like we had the same energy for the Wild. So I think that was really disappointing to see, and if that's a trend that is continuing to postseason, it's going to make it really hard to win games.
Yeah, I mean, normally to me when we watch Wild games, it kind of feels like the Wild have a longer stick than the other team. It just feels like they can hold the puck better, they poke check better. They always it honestly almost feels like they have a longer stick. And last night, it felt the exact opposite. It felt like the Penguins were able to pick the pucks off from us. They were taking the pucks from us. They were passing across the front of guys' sticks, through guys' skates, and it didn't feel like the same Wild team that we've seen the last 30 days. It obviously... Marc-Andre Fleury, though, he was my positive. I know he let in some goals, obviously, but man, did he make some amazing saves. I thought he looked great, personally. Do you disagree with me, Eric? You seem like you might disagree.
No, not at all. I mean, I'll tell you my thought. My thought is there's no funner, more fun goaltender to watch in the National Hockey League than Marc-Andre Fleury, and largely because let's face it, guys, he's very unconventional goalie. He's acrobatic, he's dramatic, he flails, he flops, he submarines, he wants to fight once in a while. I mean, who's more fun to watch than Marc-Andre Fleury? I think that today's goaltending, I think, is a little bit more robotic and a little bit more formulaic, and I think that's a contrast that kind of makes you go like, what in the world is he doing? But I mean, there's no refuting his credentials and his track record. He's going to be a first ballot Hall of Fame goaltender. He makes me a little nervous once in a while when he does that. And maybe we just get sedated with Gus the Bus because he's just like here and he's like here.
Yeah,
and he's
it's
like,
definitely
gotcha.
It almost feels like a Jim Craig, almost a 1980 kind of style that Fleury has. Back when they were just smaller pads and just flailing around, not necessarily uncoordinated, but just making saves that you're like, how did he do that?
And maybe watching the contrast brainwashes us a little bit, because you have to kind of tap yourself going through. He goes, oh, that's right. He looks like he's out of control, but that's when he's playing his best, because then Gus comes in and he just kind of gives everybody a hypodermic sedative shot because he's so calm and stuff. But and I don't know if I'm equating some recent losses of Marc-Andre to some recent wins of Gus the Bus, but yes, he played well last night and made some saves he shouldn't, but the final score was 4-1, and you've got playoffs coming up, and you don't want to see 3-goal deficits in the playoffs. So I'm wondering if last night is a little bit of a serving notice that, depending on what Gus the Bus does here, in his remaining games, I wonder if Fleury takes a step backwards towards that number one goaltender position in a game one.
Yeah.
If you had to choose right now, let's say you're the coach, what goal are you going with game one of the playoffs?
Well, Cole and I talked about this a couple days ago, and we both kind of defaulted, Alex. We kind of said, read and react. Who did what at the last possible second of the regular season to formulate a decision on? Right now, you're formulating that decision on with 4 games left, and you're saying probably Gus the Bus is the number one goalie. He comes out against the Blackhawks tomorrow, and the Hawks roll up a handful on him. I'll be back on the Fleury bandwagon. It's a read and react and gut situation as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and you meant the Blues tomorrow.
I mean the Blues
next week, but yes. I'm in the same boat, Alex. I think the same thing. I think if last night Fleury held a shutout, we win 1-2-0. Now I'm starting to say Fleury, but because he faced that was basically a playoff game last night, and it just didn't feel like the Wild played up to it. But you know who did play up to the playoff game last night? The Avs destroyed San Jose after almost dropping one in OT the couple nights before to them. And the Stars also won. They both picked up 2 points. Alex, let me kind of start with you. Thinking about the Avs, they've played one less game yet than the Wild and the Stars, but they are tied 100 points for both the Stars and the Avs, and the Wild have 98 points. How are you feeling that the end of the season is going to turn out? If you had to place your big bets on it right now, are you thinking Stars, Avs, Wild? Where are you sitting? Not being a homer.
Not being a homer, I think most likely I see the Avs, Stars, Wild, but I mean, it's hard to say. I think the Wild are going to be 3, but right now that's kind of what it's looking like.
The Avs get that tiebreaker too, I believe. So even if they tie with the Stars, I think the Avs take the tiebreaker.
Yeah. Do we have any idea what our matchups would be in the first round of playoffs, or is that too early to be?
Yeah, so if we're able to win the conference, I believe we're going to face the Kraken, and if we end up dropping to either second or third, I don't think it really makes a difference other than home field advantage at that point. We're going to either face the Stars or the Avs.
Yeah, the seeds are 1 versus 4 and 2 versus 3, and then it's head-to-head records against common opponents on whoever gets home ice in that situation. It's interesting sitting here listening both of you talk about Dallas and the Avs and the Wild, who I believe are an upper echelon team in the National Hockey League for sure. But I mean, I spend a great amount of my Monday through Friday arguing with hockey buddies and texting and big text arguments, because half of them are Toronto Maple Leafs fans. Some of them are Carolina Hurricane fans, New York Ranger fans. And they're talking about how great the East is, and nobody in the West is any good at all. I think when time is told at the end of this season, you're going to find out that the power in the National Hockey League, with the exception of the Boston Bruins, they're the one you just throw off the grading
They're insane.
point here, is going to be the West. And so if you look at Dallas and you look at Colorado and you look at Minnesota, that's 3 of the top 5 teams in the Western Division, and arguably hockey. So as you guys sit here talk about division matchups, I'm going like, holy crap, that's a tough division, this Central that the Minnesota Wild play in, right?
Eric, would you rather have the Wild face the Avs or the Stars in the first round if they do fall? Let's say they're the 2 seed, so they're still getting home field for the Wild, and let's say either the Avs or the Stars fall to that 3 seed, who would you rather face?
Well, you guys know I talk a lot with people within the Wild organization, and the Colorado Avalanche do not send the Minnesota Wild coaching staff and its players running for the hills. They're a run and gun team. Yes, they're defending national, Stanley Cup champions, and they can fly and everything else. But there's an intimidation factor, I think, that a lot of teams have with the Avalanche that I don't believe Minnesota does. Yes, the season series was 3-1 Colorado. But the most recent one was a win on the road for Minnesota. I think the teams that the Minnesota Wild do not match up more against versus Colorado are a bigger, thicker, heavier, grinding team like we saw in the St. Louis Blues series last year in the playoffs. Dallas is kind of Blues-like, guys, and Dallas is heavy. They've got some skill positions. They've got some veterans, but they bang, and their goaltending's pretty good as well. So, you know what? If I had to pick right now, as hot as it sounds, I'd pick the Avs if I were the Wild to start out with, if they have no choice.
I completely agree. The Stars make me much more nervous. I mean, honestly, just in the back of my head, that game where I think it was a 4-goal deficit the Stars were down by.
It might as well have been 9 goals.
Just thinking about that in the back of my mind, I'm sure the players have that game in the back of their mind. That makes you nervous, knowing that teams can come back on you like that, because you got to hold that confidence, hold that structure the whole game, and we know that it can happen. So they definitely make me nervous. So I don't know. If I hope we don't face the Stars in the first round. That's all I got to say. And now the Avs lost Maker, potentially.
Makar, yeah.
Makar, sorry. Maker, God. Makar for the rest of the season. And
Isn't Maker a vodka or something like that? Or
yeah, I was up late watching them last night. They didn't start till 9:30.
I think you were up late night. Wow, I think you were up late night drinking Maker, watching Makar last night. That's what I think.
That's exactly
but go ahead.
what I was. Yeah, pretending I was watching Makar because he was out. But yeah, they lost him, and then they lost one other guy too that I can't think of off the top of my head. One of their third, fourth liners. So that can make a huge impact on the rest of the season. We'll see what happens.
Who else? Yeah, that's a great point. And by the way, you hope it never happens, but injury bugs like the Wild are facing right now, and Colorado are not. They don't play any favorites either. So the plot can thicken even greater, even in this last week here, and even into the first round of the playoffs if somebody gets dinged up. And you hate to see it, and you don't ever wish it, but it's a fact of life, and so. Things could be like this for a lot of teams beyond the Wild and beyond the Avs.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else that you guys want to touch on concerning the Wild? Otherwise, we should talk about the Gophers for a second. Anything else?
Sure.
Last touches on the Wild that we need to make sure we bring up before we face the Blues. We got the Blackhawks. We've got the Jets.
Boldy for president. Predators. That's all I got.
Here. Boldy for president, Alex.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. I guess it's just my wish for them would be knowing when to hold them and knowing when to fold them. And by that, I mean the process of resting some people and getting some people healthy when they can, versus really playing out the string and playing right down to the wire. I mean, it's going to be a full reset here as early as next week, and there's going to be some time off that all players get before playoffs start, and while the rest of the teams that don't make the playoffs dust off the golf clubs, you do get a little league time here to get healthier and practice and get situated. So I think my desire and my Easter weekend wish for them is to know when to hold them and fold them, and accept your position in the playoffs as soon as you can. If that makes any sense, and as wisely as you can.
Yeah, the playoffs are long. They're not the same as the NCAA. They've got to play just as many games in one round as some of the Gophers have played the entire tournament. So they definitely need to make sure they know when they're going to save their guys, rest their guys, maybe give Gustafsson a little break if you're going to give him the first few games, things like that. But we'll see what happens. It's going to be a hell of a stretch coming up, and we'll obviously be covering it. But Gophers headed to the Natty on Saturday against Quinnipiac. I don't know if you guys know much about Quinnipiac, but They beat Michigan.
I do.
They are good.
I do, and I have. I've actually visited their son back in the day on a visit. The thing to me about the Gophers last night, guys, just an overall observation. I hadn't seen them play in a long time, probably Christmas or even after. What a puck control team. I mean, needless dumps. They've got a plan for just about everything they do on the ice, and threw a shout out to Bob Mosko last night, late night, and heard back from him, and all I heard back was from one more. It just said it was a two-word text, one more. And but I was really impressed with their overall puck possession and their systems last night. Boston College is a pretty skilled team, and they kind of systematically took the Boston BU Terriers apart there. Pretty good hockey team they took apart last night. And quite frankly, I think we talked about before we fired things up here on the cast, very easily could have been like a 7-2 or 8-2 game minus a few pipes and a few replays. But I just thought it was just a solid semifinal for Motts and the company. And, I mean, I can't see him being anything but a favorite, which may or may not be a good thing against Quinnipiac. Quinnipiac's pretty good. They're sneaky. They've won national championships lately. But I was thoroughly impressed with Minnesota last night, and just not only that they won, but how they won, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
for sure.
Just such a fun group of guys they have there. It's just great hockey all around, top to bottom. And yeah, like you said, the Post clearly was not our friend last night, but the Gophers found a way to get it done. Got 2 empty netters late, and man, good time to be in Tampa, huh?
Yeah, for sure. I've never watched a game where a team has celebrated so many goals that weren't actually goals. Unbelievable. Didn't matter. Pipe goal, it's spinning off the pipe and going back towards underneath the goalie's pads. Just bad luck. They covered the puck on the goal line once, and I thought it went over the goal line. I don't know. But the camera, somebody needs to answer for why the camera that's in the net is not wider angle. It wasn't wide enough to see whether or not it crossed the line. It didn't get zoomed out in time. And that, to me, being somebody that shoots with cameras, how could they not have a wide angle lens in there that just all it does is make sure that that puck crosses or not? And that costs.
Well, that's a great point.
Opinion.
That's a great point, and I know exactly what you're talking about. It's the robotic goal cam that did not pan down in time.
Exactly.
Into your videography point, we don't need to read that that's a CCM puck or a Bauer puck. What we need to see if that puck is either on the line or past the line. Yeah. But they seem to like it to have some sort of tight shot or something like that.
Well, and that's the weird thing is you could still get that tight shot. You can shoot in a 4K and 8K in that camera. Like, I know they have to have a battery in that box, so it's not necessarily as easy to shoot that high quality, but I'm sure they're shooting in 4K anyway. And all these games are streaming in 720, 1080. There's no reason that they couldn't have that camera in a 4K wide angle so it can see the whole thing, and yet still have a robotic thing that can actually zoom in and get those shots with keeping the full quality in the aspect ratio. It just...
You should call the NCAA right now, Cole. You should just call them and just demand to get through to the top of broadcasting and let them have it. Fortunately, we'd be talking about this right through Easter weekend if that goal would have cost the Gophers a win. But to your point, being that we're nitpicking a little bit about a 6-2 victory. I was surprised. I'm never surprised, and I came from the media. I spent 3 decades in the media, but there is an Eastern media bias towards anybody that comes from the East in a lot of college sports. And when I tuned in after the second period last night to the intermission show, I think it was on ESPN, I'm going like, are these guys talking about the game that's actually going on right now? Just like lauding BU's effort and their mastery over the Gophers? I'm like, like, what is it 4-2 Gophers or 4-2 BO, or were there 9 BU, or are there 97 chances that I did not see that BU had? I get so sick of the Eastern bias, and I bet you those guys in those studios couldn't name 2 Gophers, and yet they can name roster wide on any team from the East. And as a Midwesterner, it kind of gets sick, but the best way to shut them up is to beat them in Hoist Hardware on Saturday. That's for sure.
Yep. And Alex, I know you like a good old style Michigan goal, and I don't know if you saw Cooley he tried it. He picked it up behind the net. He tried to put it in on the backside of the net, lifted it up, but they just knocked it off his stick before he could do so. That would have been good to see. But I wish we were facing Michigan, is what I was getting at, to be honest. I would like to have a Big Ten rematch, but hey, I picked Quinnipiac in my playoff bracket. I'm on pace. If the Gophers win, I should win the bracket. I think I've got every game right so far, except for maybe one game in the first round.
Now you're just showing off.
Alex, you did one too in our pool, right?
I did. I'm pretty sure I had Penn State in the Gophers. So
you're out of it.
Yeah.
You're done.
I'm
it's too deep
Alex,
for one to.
Alex, if that would have been you last night, you would have pulled off the Michigan for sure. I've seen you on the backyard rink. You're filthy. You've got filthy mitts. I like that.
Yeah, if Alex would have taken that puck that Eriksson Ek took, he would have just kept skating. He wouldn't have.
The puck would have broke.
Yeah,
He would have been smiling, waving to the fans on his way down the ice on a breakaway for sure.
Yeah.
All
right. Well,
if I didn't tear my ACL.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hopefully Brock Faber doesn't get hurt in this final game, knock on wood, because we're going to see him up with the Wild before the end of the season, especially if, like what you talked about, Eric, if we kind of sit back and kind of accept the fact that we may not win the division at that point. I still think we have a shot right now, but if we lose to the Blues on Saturday and both the Stars and the Abs win, I think you got to kind of take a step backwards and maybe you put Faber out there a bunch and you kind of give your D a little rest. You make sure nobody else gets hurt. You don't put guys in situations like Jewell had to put himself in to block that shot. I think everybody plays a little smarter, and we'll see what happens. But Faber should be up. It's going to be fun.
Let's extend that thought for a second. Let's just say tomorrow doesn't go well against the Blues, and Faber wins, and Faber's showing up at the next Wild game, and Dean wants to rest some guys, and Marco Rossi gets called up from Iowa, and boy, you'd love to give your goaltenders a break. Do you say, hey, Marco, why don't you make sure Jesper Wallstedt jumps on the same car with you up 35W?
It's a hot take. I like it.
I'm not saying it's going to happen, but if you're going to rest your position players, maybe rest a goaltender and give fans a look at Faber, give fans a look at Rossi, give fans a look at Jesper, and take the luxury of sitting three regulars for a game or two to give them that much needed rest that you're trying to get your regulars healthy for. Stranger things have happened.
Well, we know how long playoffs are. We talked about that. If something were to happen to Fleury or something were to happen to Gustafsson, you're going to want to go to Jesper, and you're not going to want it to be his first game in a Game 6 or a Game 7.
No, that's exactly right. So,
it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, no doubt.
Lots of good stuff coming up for the Wild. We'll see what happens Saturday. We'll see what happens with the national championship. We're going to have a lot to talk about come early next week, I think, and we're going to know where we sit in the division. And if you remember on the last podcast, Eric, we actually went through every game, and we said that they were going to fall to the Penguins. So, and when we calculated it, we still ended up with 107 points in a tie. So I think
we gave them a point, though, Cole.
I
think we gave Minnesota. I think we gave them a 1 point split there. So
yes, that's
shame on us.
Shame on us. We got that one wrong. But
it's all about us. I mean, we know everything. So
yeah, we did predict that the Avs and the Stars were going to win last night anyway, so that wasn't a shocker. But I think the Avs have the Kings coming up. That'll be a tough game. I think a lot is going to be answered Saturday, more than we expect, and we'll see what happens. Make sure you tune in, subscribe to Hot Dish Sports. We'll have a new podcast coming out soon. Talk more Wild. See what happens with the Gophers. That's going to be exciting. Make sure you look us up on Twitter, Facebook, anywhere you can find Hot Dish Sports. And in the meantime, go Wild, go Gophers.